Hello, I'm Heilmann. I'm a Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. I always liked computers as a hobby, so I actually wrote like little programs at home on my old Commodore 64 and Amiga and those things, and wrote a few games as well, and I tried to sell them and it didn't work out as much, so I realized I needed a real job. So when I finished high school, I went to the local radio station and said, okay, do you need somebody who can talk and who's happy to talk? And they said like, yeah, sure. So let's find you a job here. So I actually, the first 3 months I worked for free, and I was a pizza delivery guy at the same time to make money. Then after like 2 years at a radio station, I realized that the internet is coming up mainstream. So in 1996, we started connecting to the internet to get news, for example, from news agencies and these kind of things. So I ended up putting my computer knowledge together with my journalism knowledge, and that was kind of like web development back then, because you had to write and you had to actually create some code and make it and publish it. So to me, at the beginning of the internet was like not only consumption, but it was like mostly putting yourself out there and collating news and putting them on other sites and these kind of things. When it comes to learning really what you're doing, that's where education comes in, that's where teaching comes in. Because once you write your own first blog, or once you, even better, when I wrote my first book, I had to learn what I was doing, what I was already doing naturally. But then I had to understand it, because people asked me all kind of questions how it works, and then I didn't have an excuse any longer. I actually had to learn. So the best way to learn something is to teach it. And it's never been easier than on the web, because in the past you couldn't go to any school and say like, I want to be a teacher, and they're like, well, where's your diploma, where's this and that? But anybody can go online and put a course up on YouTube, or anybody can go to like companies like Skillshare or whatever, a Pluralsight, to actually start doing courses. It's a big market out there. And I think when somebody feels struggling about learning something, try to explain it to somebody else. In all my career, it was one person making the difference. In Yahoo, it was one person that said like, we gotta be more open, we gotta hire more people, we gotta allow our people to talk more about what they're doing. Because in the past, Yahoo was just like, keep the website running, don't talk about it. But then they started open sourcing a lot of things like the UI user interface library. They allowed people to have developer blogs. They wanted to reach developers through the brand Yahoo rather than just end users. So that's where I came in, and that's where that team started. And the best thing I liked about Yahoo was through my blogging and through like going to events and like meetups and these kind of things, I knew a lot of people that I wanted to hire, that I wanted to work with. The team in Yahoo UK was ridiculous. We had, of the 21 people, I think we had written 45 books, all of us together. They were all experts working on the biggest website in Europe at that time, and also starting new projects that like Yahoo Answers came out back then. That was something we started from scratch after looking at the source code originally. We got to rewrite that. So that talent pool was ridiculously good. It was kind of weird because I was lead engineer, and then there was nothing else to move into. There was the career path was you got to become manager now. You're not allowed. You're not allowed, but you don't need to code any longer. You actually should have a team and look after them and actually do that. So that's what the normal career path in IT is. And I didn't feel at that time that I wanted to give up talking about programming and programming myself. So I actually more or less invented that job of developer evangelist, and actually wrote a handbook about it that I did in 2 afternoons and published. And that was basically to convince my management to give me that role and to start that program inside Yahoo. So that's how that whole thing came about. So the transition for me was pretty natural, because I didn't want to be the person that writes the same code I've written for 10 years before. Rather than doing everything myself, I wanted to empower people to be allowed to write the code that they want to, and not the code that's needed by somebody's measurement. So what a lot of people don't understand at that time, having an evangelism team, or the DevRel team as you call them now, or dev advocacy team back then, was very important to show the company how much comes out of having that, and how much you empower your engineers to do something different. Hiring people is incredibly hard. Having a product out there that people are using, like a library or something like that, makes it a lot easier, because people already know what they're going to be working with when they come into the company. So the first 3 months of like teaching people something is basically already gone because they know it when they come in. So it's a great way to get people to scale your team and get new people in that are already experts in your product by throwing it out there publicly. But it needs people that are very good at explaining it and getting people excited about it, because otherwise, I mean, there's so many things out there that people can use. You want people to use your product when you open source it as well. And that's why a dedicated evangelism team was a very, very important step there. I think the biggest problem was making sure that you don't antagonize the rest of the engineering team. That people like, well, you talk about the stuff that we do and you don't do the stuff, so what is that about, kind of thing. So it was very important to make sure that you keep explaining to people, I do that for you, and whatever you need sorted, actually, please tell me about it. So I spent more time in meetings in the company to allow engineers having more time on their hands to do some experimentation and try some things out. And not every product that actually was an experiment became a product anymore. So introducing opportunities like hack days or hack weeks that engineers can do whatever they want rather than just like whatever their manager tells them was part of this as well. So the barriers were upper management understanding why we do this, why should we spend money on that, but the big answer there was like it's much easier to hire. And for the engineers in the company, like, why aren't you coding? And our bug list is so long, why aren't you actually fixing bugs? And I'm like, well, I'm actually sitting in the meetings with management where decisions that would make a lot of work for you, would mean a lot of work for you, are not being done because I'm there. So that's the kind of answers that you had to get ready back then. In Yahoo, it wasn't 4 years in the UK. Then the UK office closed down, so they asked me to move to America again, and I didn't wanna. So I stayed in Europe and started working at Mozilla for 4 years. In Mozilla, I worked mostly on the documentation part of the web and also on Firefox OS, the operating system, to a degree. The problem that we have in Mozilla is that we are trying to take on the Googles of this world and the Amazons and the Microsofts, and they had like so many more people than Mozilla had. Mozilla was a small company back then. So we wanted to make sure that we have a presence at all the events and the meetups and in universities, but we didn't have enough people to send out. I mean, I was on the road for like every week and it was too much. So we realized, what can we do? The good thing that Mozilla has is it has a huge community of volunteers, like hundreds and thousands of people, and worldwide as well. So instead of me flying to India and giving a presentation there and then flying back again and not being able to answer anything, we were first looking for somebody who works for Mozilla in India and say like, how about we teach you to become a presenter, and we give you the materials and we give you the education, we do speaking training with you. Or when nobody was there or the people were too busy, then we took people from the community and say like, hey, you're a representative of Mozilla, how about we teach you up to actually be able to say the right things and not just come up with random things that you hope are right. Mozilla is open from the very beginning. It's a non-for-profit company. It's actually not supposed to make money, not supposed to make loss either, but it's basically not there for profit. So the idea was you were much freer in what you were supposed to do, so we could experiment much more and create things that are great for the open web but have no financial benefit. So there were a lot of things that basically we experimented with and we shut down again. The open web became much better because of what Mozilla does and did back then as well. Firefox OS is definitely that thing, that we wrote an operating system for mobile phones based on HTML5, created a lot of new standards like video streaming standards. Geolocation was just like this weird thing that now became a very much an important thing. Anything to do with hardware acceleration of like CSS and these kind of things came kind of out of that research, because we had to make the thing work on the lowest of mobile phones, on the cheapest of devices, and still render fast and give people a good experience. So writing something like a keyboard for mobile phones in HTML5 spawned a lot of good new standards. Things like interaction observer, that basically things we know when something comes into the screen rather than we hope we know when something comes into the screen. A lot of the W3C and WICG standards that are now part of HTML5 came out of that research. So while it was not a commercial success, it was a very daring thing to do, and a lot of learning came from it. For me, I just reached the limit. I was like, okay, I'm talking to the same communities over and over again. People are excited for me to, as the Mozilla person, to talk about open things. Where do I go now? Where do I see the biggest problem of the web right now? And that was still the Microsoft thing, that we had lots of old browsers, Internet Explorer dependencies, and they tried hard to actually reach the open community and get people involved in open source products that Microsoft did, but nobody wanted it because they didn't have somebody to relate to. And when Ray Bango, my former manager that I worked with at Ajaxian before as well and blogged there, when he hired me at Microsoft, and Aaron Gustafson, the third person that was part of all the web standards work that we've done before, when us two got hired, people were like, oh my God, Microsoft is really taking this serious. They want to do open source things because they know I'm not a person that would stay if I don't like it. As I said, it's 4 years now. I haven't felt ever to actually think, okay, I'm not doing anything good here. It's like everything that came so far, and do the same work that I did in Mozilla, but with a totally different audience. I can reach those developers that don't go to events. I can reach those developers that don't blog or don't care about blogs. They just do their 9-to-5 job, and I can make them learn about cool new things through the channels that only reach them. And that's something that I wanted to do, and that was very satisfying to me, to take that open knowledge and bring it into a space where people are not that interested in open yet. The bigger problem I found was the prejudice that Microsoft had over the years, that people like fanboys of other companies were like, they kept saying the same things over and over, like tired, old prejudices that the company hasn't done for like 20 years. And I'm standing there like, okay, you say you're open, you say you're interested, why don't you look at the facts right now, what's happening, and instead of just shutting it down? Other companies like Google have the same problem, that basically people have a misconception of the company as a whole and then don't look at any of your products because of the idea that they have of your company. A lot of what we learned and what I found learned very early on about this is that best practices are not defined, but they're found. So we looked at how we actually build products, what worked, what made us more efficient, what actually made our end users happier as well, what made the product more accessible. And then we actually documented it and said like, okay, here's something we found, and here's something we thought should be a best practice, because here's the proof why it is a best practice, and not just like, we should be doing this because somebody on a blog said that's basically what you should be doing. So we always made sure that when we put something in place, that it had an effect, and not just like we do it because we want to. And there was a big clash between engineering there, especially in Europe and in America. In America, a lot of engineers back then were like, let's make the thing that is the best performing thing and make it that way, and force people to use it. And in our case, it was always like, you cannot force anybody to do anything. Like it should make sense rather than anything else. I mean, there were ridiculous things back then when some people demanded in HTML we should alphabetize the attributes in the HTML element, because that way it packs better when it's gzipped on the server. And I'm like, I'm not gonna re-educate 400 of our engineers to alphabetize these things. So instead, how about I write a script that goes through the HTML and alphabetizes it and then gzips it. So instead of re-educating a lot of people or forcing people to do a certain coding standard, I very much early on started writing tools for that, writing scripts for that, and processes on the server side or in the publication side, that instead of re-educating people. So making them most effective by allowing them to do what they do best, but then making sure that their outcome is readable by other people as well, is a much better investment than forcing these people to work in a way that they don't feel comfortable with. That's a big thing. Every new engineer that comes into a company comes with a lot of great ideas. A lot of them come with like weird ideas as well, but that's also fine. So I'm not hiring a number, I'm hiring a person, and that person has to be effective in the team. And what I also started very early on in my team was to make people present to other parts of the company, to the rest of the team. I introduced a thing called lightning talks back then, which was 15 minutes before lunch break. And it was, the format was 5 minutes. Here's something that here's a problem that I encountered in my job right now, in the product that I'm working on. And then 5 minutes, here is the solution that I found. Here's what I did in a programming sense or in a process sense to make that work. And then it was 5-minute discussion if we should turn this into a best practice, if we should document it, or if it was a one-off and it's not applying to all the other products in the company. So this was a very powerful way of getting the team involved in the best practice documentation, the best practice process as well, rather than just saying like, we got a new process, you got to follow it, because people aren't going to do that. JavaScript fatigue is a weird one because it's not necessarily about the language itself, but about the infrastructure around it. So people are very annoyed that like having a simple website means like 5 megabytes of JavaScript being downloaded because people use like 15 different libraries there. I think there's an interesting one because JavaScript fatigue has been, I mean, I think the term is like 4 years old by now as well. So it's turning a bit again. It's turning into a space where the framework developers and the framework communities start listening more to standards people and to best practice people of the web to actually make their products not look like this horrible thing, this horrible behemoth of like monolithic code that needs to be downloaded just to get something there. I think we're in an interesting space where the language itself has been standardized so much that it actually does a lot of things that libraries only were able to do before, and that browsers and also engines like Chromium that run inside Node and inside Electron can do the things that we needed frameworks before as well. I think the JavaScript fatigue, I'm actually kind of annoyed about the rhetorics around it. Like there's a lot of like standards people that are super angry about it and paint everybody who uses a framework as a horrible person to the web and a horrible person to other people, because the basic thing is like, oh, if you use a library, then somebody in India cannot use your website because it will be too slow to even download, kind of thing, which is a great argument, and yes, totally understandable, but then help those libraries become better. Then help those libraries do server-side rendering rather than client-side rendering, and out of a sudden it can be even good for those markets because the caching happens on the server side. So there was a knucklehead at the loggerheads at one time where the JavaScript fatigue thing was like because people felt overwhelmed. But I think with the proper tooling and the proper documentation, we can get past that JavaScript fatigue thing as well. One big thing we're working on right now is WebHint, and that is a hinting tool, a testing tool for the web. So you can put a URL in there and it says you what's wrong with all of that. How is your server set up the wrong way? And that one also ties into how your whole stack is set up. So if you use Webpack, if you use React, and analyzes what you're doing there as well. And if you create far too much code to what you want to do, it flags it up to you and say like, by the way, this is 5 meg of JavaScript that could be 500K, because you're saying you're not supporting these browsers, but you're still sending all the code through. So I think one of the big things that I'm investing in right now is to make sure that the tooling prevents us from making mistakes rather than just telling us we made mistakes. So I hope that in the nearer future, a lot of like bad products that because of laziness have gone out to the web and caused that like JavaScript fatigue and confusion thing is something that we can do better. And the message of like, you got to understand everything or you're not a professional developer can be removed in like, hey, if you start with Visual Studio Code and you put these extensions in, you already know what you're doing. You already are there. You use that as a tool for what it's supposed to be, a tool and not something you have to learn. So hopefully we're getting better that way, and I can see some pointers in the right direction already. I'm very excited about the whole machine learning part of IT, and I've been working on that a lot inside the company and outside as well. I'm an invited expert of the German government on like ethics and AI and also automation and workplaces. And there's super exciting things that like auto-completion of your code that actually uses millions of lines of code from GitHub and learning from that to show you what you probably want to code next. So to me, and I've given talks about that as well, I think the skill of programming, the skill of coding is going away as well. It's not something that we need to know that much. A lot of products that we build for our end users are very simple. People's needs are not as complex as we think they are, so we could generate these things rather than writing them by hand every single time. So I'm excited to see how automation in the internet space and also in this computing space will affect us in the nearer future as well.